So it seems that we've got some rather big Warhammer 40k rules reveals today, all manner of different previews for Space Wolf characters and one of their detachments, and Games Workshop's dropped a teaser article on the new mission deck for Warhammer 40k, in particular going into some asymmetric missions a little bit more. Let's talk about what we've got. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, where today we're talking big rules previews, both for the Space Wolves and the new mission deck. This one's shaping up to be an exceedingly busy week for Warhammer 40k. We've got the Space Wolf Codex coming out, and it's going to be in the big army set launch box, so lots of excitement from Space Wolf players getting the first of their new units there, plus the chapter approved mission deck changing up the core rules for Warhammer 40k once again, plus not one but two preview shows, an Armageddon Crusade book, and a fair bit more. Seems that Games Workshop started strong with the previews as suspected. We've both got big ones for the Space Wolves and the mission deck that have both dropped today. I thought we'd go over them in turn, starting with the Space Wolves. If you're looking to pick up or order in any of the new miniatures, mission decks or Crusade books, then the video sponsor Crusader Games might have you covered here in the UK. 15% off Games Workshop prices. They'll be linked in the video description and I'll talk through them a bit more later. Links below will be all of the other channel's affiliate discount retailers from around the world. If you buy through any of the links in your region, then it saves a fair bit of money versus Games Workshop and helps to support Warspecs Tactics a little bit, so a big thank you to anyone picking things up through them. Here are the times for when pre-orders go live: midnight Eastern Time in the USA and Canada, 10 AM in the UK, 11 AM in Western Europe, and then midday Australian Eastern Time down under. A big thank you to anyone supporting through the links around the world. It does help out the channel. And fingers crossed Games Workshop actually makes enough of the mission decks and the big army launch box sets this time. Let's get into the rules previews though, and starting off we've got the Space Wolves. For this reveal set, Games Workshop has actually been fairly generous with the amount of rules shown off, talking about the vast majority of the character choices from the army, and also some rules for the Wolfguard Terminators, given that they can bodyguard a bunch of them, and also a character-focused detachment. First up, we've got the Wolfguard Terminators, which we knew a little about already. Their wargear options from their miniatures is going to be a power weapon of some sort, plus then either the choice of Storm Bolters versus Storm Shields. I'd guess hopefully that those power weapons might be nice mastercrafted damage 2 ones, though we'll wait to see on that front I suppose. It looks like the pack leader sergeant can take either claws or great big great axe. Hopefully that has some fun stats, and one of them takes an assault cannon as well, which I'd guess would make sense over a storm shield for one guy, as that's quite a nice bit of firepower. As for the rest of the Space Wolves, they move 6 inches, not 5, and they'll certainly be relevant for some of the new characters, as it looks like Logan Grimnar and Arjac Rockfist can only join these guys and not any of the standard Terminator variants, so it's going to be these guys that are the bodyguard and add-on for them, so hopefully they're good. For this one, they gave us a view of their new datasheet rule, which is called Rugged Resilience. I'm guessing that this will replace the sort of Fury of the First +1 to hit against the Oath of Moment target for them, and it seems that this just makes them flat more durable than standard Terminators. Every time a weapon attacks them, if the strength is greater than their toughness, then it's -1 to wound. Doesn't look like that's dependent on a character leading the unit or anything like that. So it looks like the Terminator squad will just be unusually tanky compared with most of them, and that is pretty handy for wandering around on the mid-board objectives. In general, Space Marine Terminators maybe don't tend to hit quite as hard as some of their other units for the points cost, but tend to be more resilient than most, and I guess that tries to further carve out that role for them. I suppose the idea will be that they teleport in, maybe rapid ingress or something, and then charge down an enemy unit on the mid-board, hopefully slay them, and then compared with most Space Marine units they're going to be harder to take down. Seems like a good datasheet rule to me. That doesn't seem like a downgrade, if that does indeed replace Fury of the First. Next up, we've got the Terminator champion in Arjac Rockfist. From those blurry datasheet leaks, it looks like he moves 6 inches as well, and can only join those Wolfguard Terminators. His stat line is 6 wounds at toughness 5 with a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable. Previously, I think he had 2 special rules, and they've shown off one of them here, which is Champion of the Kingsguard. Each time this model makes a melee attack that targets a character unit, you can re-roll the hit roll and re-roll the wound roll. That was already something that he had on his current datasheet, and it was paired with the ability to do Epic Challenge for free. So it looks like that rule in particular has had a minor buff. Rather than having to do Epic Challenge for free, you just get precision on your weapon literally all the time, so it makes the stratagem redundant. And I guess that's a very slight improvement, as it means that you could use Epic Challenge on another character elsewhere in the same army this phase if you needed to. It still looks like he has 2 special rules from his blurry datasheet. Can't really make out the other one too well though. Previously it was a damage buff for depleted Terminator units that had taken casualties. For his damage profile, Foe Hammer is unchanged for its raw numbers, 5 attacks at Strength 8, AP 2 and Damage 3, so pretty mighty sort of anti-elite style profiles there, and you can also throw it at 6 inches for a single other attack, which is all rather cool. Previously it just had Anti-Monster 2+, and those keywords have been changed for Anti-Monster 3+, Anti-Vehicle 3+, and Precision. which I'd say is really quite a big win. Anti-monster is a pretty niche special rule and will only be relevant against certain monsters. Getting anti-vehicle 3+ thrown in basically means that he's just flat out effective against literally anything that you throw him against. Very good against elite infantry just with his standard stat line, and he'll be wounding the very toughest monsters and vehicles around on a 3+ as well. Overall looks like he's a champion to make the Space Wolves proud, provided he costs the right amount of points for his abilities of course. Finally, for named characters, they also gave us a teaser of Logan Grimnar as well, getting an aura of +1 to cost stratagems with a special rule called Guile of the Wolf. I guess that means he'll be wanting to operate close to the front lines, maybe scrapping over a mid-board objective will be ideal with that. That can really throw a spanner in the works for some enemies that have some powerful stratagems or need a key charge reroll or something like that. I guess having him with a squad of Wolfguard Terminators scrapping on a mid-board point would be pretty annoying for the enemy. Before we move on though, I'll just give a quick focus shout out to today's video sponsor in Crusader Games. They're a new friendly local gaming store based in Somerset in the UK, selling Warhammer miniatures and products at 15% off Games Workshop prices, shipping within the UK at free postage over £75 worth of orders. If you live locally, then their shop's based here in Burnham-on-Sea. For a new store, they've got some pretty solid stock levels, some of which displayed here, and they're looking to particularly set themselves apart with regular in-store events, airbrush tutorial sessions, and plenty of full-size gaming tables available for public use that you can book in advance. I'll leave their website links down in the video description below. They're typically around about 15% off Games Workshop's prices. It feels pretty easy to navigate from a quick look. You can backorder stuff that's not in stock on request, and they have a reward point system called Purity Seal points, getting you further small discounts. They're aiming to order in good numbers of Space Wolf box set stock. This will be going live on their web store at 10 AM on Saturday morning, so it could be one place that might not sell out quite as quickly as some major retailers out there. Could be well worth a check. In any case though, I wish them all the best in their new venture. Feel free to check them out, links down in the video description below. Let's get back to the Space Wolf teasers though, and Games Workshop have also shown off things for 3 more characters and their new detachment. Next up we have Njal Stormcaller, interestingly for a Space Wolf Terminator release, being reincarnated as a power armoured character, though with a pretty fun miniature with a stormcalling staff and his raven taking flight. It seems to move 7 inches like the rest of the Space Wolves in power armour, and is 4 wounds with a 4+ invulnerable save. And he still seems to be firing off damage with Living Lightning with a whole bunch of Strength 7 and Damage 1 attacks. He can join the Grey Hunters, Blood Claws or Wolfguard Head Takers. Games Workshop gave us an insight as to his special rule though, getting the assault keyword and auto-advancing 6 inches whenever his squad advances. So that means that his units have been moving 13 inches and still able to shoot. Pretty cool for maybe getting some Grey Hunters right into the midboard all very quickly, and then you'd be able to blaze away with 30 odd bolt shots in a big unit of 10 of them I suppose. It maybe does feel a little bit less meaningful though if it's going to be a bunch of Strength 4 AP 0 Damage 1 fire, which would absolutely make a big mess of lighter infantry out there, but isn't going to do too much to big tough stuff with high saves. I guess being able to auto-advance 6 inches before an advance and charge could be pretty massive, particularly in say Gladius or Stormlance, depending on the Wolfguard Head Taker's profile and exactly what other characters that could lead them and give them big buffs. He might be at least kind of interesting there. From someone reporting that they'd translated some of the blurry pictures, they seem to think that his other rule might reduce weapon range on a unit hit by Living Lightning in some way, which could add a bit of disruption. I'll be honest, it's an interesting special rule, though I'm just a bit apprehensive that he'll just be winding up being a big investment unit that can only really deal with light infantry. I just can't help but think that the Wolfguard Head Takers might well have a different thing that they could pair better with, though I guess we'll see. Otherwise, for power armoured infantry leaders, we've got that Wolf Priest. Games Workshop have previously teased the stat line for him, and we basically know that he is a chaplain essentially with a 7-inch movement and a pretty similar damage and defensive profile. He can equally just lead those 3 power armoured Space Wolf unique units. When you would be giving it a +1 to wound, and he does keep the same litany of hate there. And then Games Workshop had teased that the other rule would be a healing rule of some description. It does look like it's basically just flat out the apothecary rule pretty well. And it means that in the command phase you can restore 1 slain model to a unit, which does look pretty handy. That really does look like a pretty valuable rule if the unit that he's leading is damaged but not outright destroyed, which definitely isn't guaranteed. I guess that'd be most valuable on the Wolfguard Head Takers out of the units that he can lead, given that that'd be a 3 wound model with a 4+ invulnerable save that he's restoring there, and likely one that costs a fair few points as well. Feels like he might directly just help them out a bit more than Njal does maybe. Extra melee damage and restoring a miniature, though again like Apothecaries, it's a big gamble as to whether or not the squad actually survives to be able to use the rule at all. Finally, for the power armoured characters they showed off, there's the Battle Leader. From those blurry datasheets, he moves 7 inches and has a big 5 wounds at toughness 4 with a 4+ invulnerable save. It looks like he gets the advantage of that shield whether or not he has a plasma pistol. I don't know if it counts as it being slung on his back. If he has the plasma pistol drawn on the miniature, he can also lead those same 3 units, so no going with generic Space Marines, at least what it looks like from the datasheet. Interestingly, he doesn't just get the lethal hits that lieutenants get, instead he has tempered ferocity. This one gives you sustained hits, 1 for his lead unit, but also reroll hit rolls of 1 against enemy units within 6 inches, both shooting and fighting, though fighting is going to be far more meaningful. When taken together, at least outside of units using Oath of Moment or anything like that, that's a pretty powerful combo. If he's buffing a unit that normally hits on a 3+, that usually equates to around about a 45% damage boost. So pretty massive against anything that they're wounding well, kind of similar to lethal hits against things they'd be wounding on a 5+, and only really beaten by lethal hits against really big tough things that his squad is wounding on a 6 or worse. That looks like a pretty decent buffing rule at first take. Will be interesting to see what his second boosting rule is, whether or not it's just copying the lieutenant's fallback shoot and charge style thing. That would also be handy enough, I guess. Between his equipment and this though, he does look like a pretty interesting generic character. Then finally for Space Wolf character previews, we've got a detachment shown off, the Saga of the Bolt. In their previous stream, they stated that there'd be 3 detachments all based around sagas in some way. And at least from this one that they've shown off, it looks like they have both a lower tier and higher tier detachment rule, and you unlock the higher tier one by doing a few boasts with various characters. It seems that there's 4 different ones to choose from, and if you can manage 3 of those over the course of the game, then you unlock the better rule. For the buffs that this one gives, the lower tier one is significantly worse than the higher tier one. The one that you start out with is character units can either reroll a hit roll or a wound roll or a damage roll when they shoot or fight. So a small damage buff that could be on a powerful shooting or melee attack, I guess, so it adds efficiency but probably isn't going to change the world most of the time. But then if you can do 3 of those 4 boasts, you get a pretty powerful all-army-wide buffing rule where every single time a unit either shoots or fights, you can reroll 1 hit roll, 1 wound roll, and 1 damage roll, so 3 rerolls potentially there, and that applies to things that don't have the character keywords. That's a pretty massive damage boost, and suddenly makes things with single powerful shots like las cannons into an absolutely fearsome threat, but just adds efficiency to every single time any unit attacks wherever it might be on the table. Basically, it does mean that the army gets massively better if you can achieve 3 of those 4 boasts though. And here's the list of them, with them applying to character units. Some of them are pretty easy, and some of them are less so. Destroy an Oath of Moment target unit, I feel is just going to happen naturally for Space Marines. That's what you're going to aim to do. Being on an objective in the midfield that you control from round 2 onwards, again, is something that you'd hope will be happening. You just need to move a character unit there and make sure that they survive on maybe your natural expansion style one. Then to me the other 2 seem potentially harder. One of the options is for a unit to have destroyed 2 Oath of Moment target units over the course of a battle. I feel like destroying 1 is pretty reliable with a character unit, but then there's at least a pretty reasonable chance they get focused down and destroyed in return before they can take down another. And then the other one is to get a character unit wholly within the enemy deployment zone, which could be doable via deep strike, but only if the opponent chooses not to screen out their deployment zone, which I guess they would do if they know what they're doing against the Space Wolves. You could maybe have something like a lone Terminator character, or a Phobos lieutenant trying to deep strike to achieve that one perhaps. I feel like it's the sort of thing that might succeed fairly easily in casual games where people aren't worrying about screening too much, but in maybe big more competitive games, it doesn't seem like it'd be the hardest thing to prevent this in the world. I do kind of like it though. It does look like eventually over the course of the game there's a pretty good chance you will be able to access the massive damage rerolls, though likely not straight away unless the opponent's just really not screening their backfield whatsoever. And these ones do feel a fair bit less arbitrary than some of the previous Saga goals, which really depended on your opponent having certain units and getting them killed. As with before though, if this is the direct successor to the Champions of Rus, looks like it's really going to encourage you to take lots of characters. Finally, there's an enhancement as well, I think called Skjold, and this one has to have the bearer on the battlefield, and then anytime any Space Wolves character achieves a boast, you generate 1 command point. That seems like a very reasonable one to have around if you've got a character that's going to remain safe for a good part of the game. Seems like there's a good chance you're pretty guaranteed to be taking down Oath of Moment targets and holding central objectives, so this should mean some easy command points there. At first impressions, it maybe looks a little bit unclear as to whether or not you get that every time a character achieves any boast, regardless of whether or not it's already been done, or if it's just the first time around. From the wording, it would actually seem to imply to me that it's literally every time any character does any of the list, and that could mean that you just generate command points basically every turn unless you get unlucky or things are going very badly. I guess you might not get the Oath of Moment kill first turn if everything's hidden though. Overall, definitely looks like an interesting detachment, really quite a big powerful mechanic if you can succeed in doing those quests. At least the quests are not quite so random as they used to be. Overall, pretty interesting stuff for the Space Wolves. I feel like most of the characters have the potential to be interesting. Though of course we don't really have all that much context yet in terms of points for the characters and the rest of the detachment rules. Moving on, let's talk about Games Workshop's other preview today, and they talked a bit more about the new chapter approved deck. A fair bit of it mainly going on about things that they'd already previewed, though there were some interesting other reveals, particularly for the Asymmetric Missions. This one's going to be the new main mission deck for Warhammer 40k, essentially updating the Pariah Nexus deck, and likely to be the last one of these for 10th edition. Hopefully supply of these will be better than it was for Pariah Nexus, as that really was a problem and lots of people missed out on them. For the cards, they're broadly the same sort of idea as they used to be. A primary mission for the main way to score, the mission rule for the twist on the mission that might help battle line or similar, deployment maps, at least some of which haven't changed, and then secondary missions for both players to achieve points as you go along throughout the game with actions and other things. On top of that, there'll be a mission rules pamphlet, the last one of which introduce actions and things, and small changes here could be kind of big as to how 40k is played in general, as well as maybe the more cookie-cutter standard 2,000 point match play games. They've also introduced more dedicated rules for incursion and asymmetric missions for this one. I think a lot of people are hyped for the asymmetric ones with an obvious attacker and defender and some rules to help that kind of play. They've also redone the catch-up mechanic again in the challenger cards. For the incursion missions, it looks like there's two major differences between these and the Strike Force ones. Incursion games are the 1,000 point games of Warhammer 40k, and they're still played on the same sort of table size as Strike Force, 44 by 60 inches. For deployment maps, it looks like the change for incursion is to put the objectives slightly closer together, so you can see the difference between Dawn of War incursion versus Strike Force Dawn of War, or the objectives are just slightly closer to the centre of the table given that you've got fewer units interacting. And then otherwise, for the things they've actually teased, it looks like rather than having a rule of 3, you have a rule of 2 for incursion, so you can't spam 3 copies of one unit that just happens to be efficient, as that would make up really quite a big chunk of your roster. You also get only up to 4 battle line units rather than 6. I guess that might impact a few armies and what units they choose to spam and maybe increase a bit of diversity there. At 1,000 points though, for the vast majority of armies, I feel like that would be quite comfortable as to the units that you can use. I don't think that's going to be a particularly onerous restriction for most people. Broadly, this one's been pretty well received. I don't think it's going to be a major difference versus the rules previously, but it does seem that these rule changes make sense for a smaller game mode. Otherwise, the second big change are these asymmetric mission cards, and Games Workshop revealed a few more things about them in this preview. This one's aimed at more for-fun casual games as opposed to competitive play or anything like that, and again do seem to be the sort of content that people have been wanting. Good for more casual match play games, which is how a whole load of people play Warhammer, and daring to move beyond absolutely symmetrical maps to give no player any kind of advantage under any circumstances. It seems these will also have different deployment maps, and they gave the example of this pincer attack one where the defender has a sort of chevron to deploy in, and the attacker has some corner boxy deployment zones. The objectives on this one are more skewed towards the defender with 2 in their deployment zone, and in the article they stated that the attacker always gets to go first, but they also have to set up first. So basically it means that the defender can try and perfectly counter-deploy them as well as possible to try and mitigate their aggression and the first turn things they're going to be able to do, and probably hide a lot of units from the Alpha Strike. They stated that the armies are going to have different ways to play primary objectives, and gave one example here. The mission card they showed off was called Siphoned Power, and this one starts out with the defender having all the victory points, and then the attacker gradually trying to steal them off, doing actions over the course of the game. To achieve this one, the attacker has to do actions with units on objectives, to sacrifice their shooting or damage normally. If they do that, then they steal victory points from the defender and put them on their score, and you get 2 victory points for doing that action in your home field, 3 victory points in no man's land, and a big 5 if it's within the enemy deployment zone. It looks like it's a fairly easy action to do, given that you just move on to an objective and then do the action that completes at the end of your turn, kind of like cleanse. I guess if between those mechanics the attacker winds up getting more than 25 victory points, then essentially they've tipped the balance and won on primary, though you'd still have secondary missions going on alongside that, so I guess up to another 40 victory points there, so this would only be part of the story. Does feel like a simple and well executed example though, the attacker's trying to do actions and the defender's trying to stop them at all costs. We still haven't really got any meaningful things that look like they're going to be shaking up 2,000 point games from the core card mechanics. They showed off a couple of deployment zones, Sweeping Engagement and Dawn of War, which look like they're unchanged from the regular 2,000 point things that we had previously. They've confirmed that actions are still a thing, though I guess small tweaks and changes to secondary objectives could matter in a big way. The other big change that they've done is that secret missions are gone. These are the options to bin off your main primary mission to get a bonus one at the end of Battle Round 3. which could and did get used in more competitive games, maybe often a bit ignored and neglected in more casual ones. I feel like for a lot of people there's plenty enough going on in a game of Warhammer trying to win over the objectives and destroy the opponent's army, that they just felt like a bit of an arcane thing that occasionally you could bother with, but usually not unless you had a plan to do one of them, or if the game had just fallen super well so it made sense. In their place, it looks like we're getting the Challenger cards. They're also aimed to be a catch-up mechanic, the idea being to give some fun stuff to the player who's getting beaten badly, so they've got a bit more damage to throw at the enemy, or some extra ways they can catch up on victory points. The mechanic for this one is that you get a Challenger card if a player is behind by 6 victory points or more at the start of a battle round. We don't know the exact wording on how you gain them, as I think they said in stream that you can choose a Challenger card or draw one, and if that's right then it sounds like you can just select your favourite, and each one of them gives you a free in-game boost via a 0 CP bonus stratagem, or lets you get another Challenger mission to score some points in some way. You can choose to use them via one of those but not both. The way that Games Workshop have done these will matter far more than secret missions for casual games, I think, as rather than having a slightly arcane thing that's a big decision for a game. Basically, these are one extra small advantage nudge that players will want to take advantage of if they're entitled to them. So it's basically very much in a player's interest to remember the mechanic and then actually make sure they use them if they do trail by more than 6 victory points. They've given us 2 examples of these so far. This one gives you the choice between a 0 CP Force of Breach and a secondary mission called Secure Extraction Zone. The 0 CP one essentially gives you walk through walls for any unit during the movement phase, so you could say have something like a Dreadnought or a big Tyranid monster or something smash straight through a terrain piece and get a lot more movement and maybe engage an enemy that they otherwise couldn't have. Kind of depends on the right army to make that worth it. It won't be useful if you basically got all infantry. Otherwise the second one is a nice easy 3 victory point mission. Basically a bit like Containment, do an action within 9 inches of a battlefield edge and outside of your deployment zone, and you just get 3 victory points straight away. The other example they revealed is the 0 CP one for reroll hits and wounds of 1 for a unit, and that's a pretty massive damage buff, plus 36%, which you could apply to the biggest, scariest unit in your army. I feel like getting that just completely for free is nice enough. And then the bonus mission is called Establish Comms, and this one again is an action that you do for 3 victory points. The stipulation on this one is that units have to be greater than 15 inches away from all the other units of your army. So I guess it really just depends as to whether or not that's convenient. For some armies and some battlefields it'll be super easy. If you've got limited big elite units left and they're close together, then probably not. I feel like this mechanic's had some mixed feelings with the way it's being received. I bear in mind that the 6 victory point thing though does mean that you're kind of unlikely to ever use this at all in Battle Round 2. One player would have had to have got really quite significantly ahead on the secondary objectives, so I guess maybe it could have some weird interaction with some non-Strike Force missions. Would you just draw Challenger cards every single turn for that one where the defender starts on the 50 victory points, for example? In more standard Strike Force games though, unless one player's absolutely rounded up their secondary objectives on round 1 and the other player's not scored anything though, you're probably not getting a Challenger card turn 2. So I guess it'd be turn 3 onwards that make more difference, and then from there there's a better chance that one player might be significantly ahead of another. I think for perhaps the majority of games it might make them a little bit closer. The cards could give some small advantages, maybe make things closer than they would have been, and give the player who's behind some really quite fun things, even if it doesn't necessarily win them the game or anything. Getting to just some fun extra damage is definitely a thing to keep you engaged and interested. I think maybe the biggest misfeelings though is that they just might be kind of counterproductive for rewarding good gameplay. Say a player absolutely has outmaneuvered their foe and taken some big risks and made some clever decisions that have put them 6 victory points in the lead. It just feels like it's kind of punishing them for doing so. So maybe isn't the best feels for a game between 2 equally skilled opponents when one has done something good. Suddenly that lead might be cut to a 3 victory point one due to the sort of objective freebie near enough, if the opponent can't get yet more value out of those stratagems. Otherwise it does seem like it could reward damage focused armies quite a bit. Maybe if you've got a big scary army that's pushing to table the enemy, they might score low in the first few turns while the enemy has control of the objectives and they're focused on killing things. This might give that damage focused army yet more resources to pull out the win, giving them some free stratagems maybe turn 3 or 4. And then scoring super big turn 5 when there's no enemy left on the table. It could be a mechanic that, at least in theory land, could reward the army that was ultimately going to win the game anyway. I feel like for those reasons it's just maybe a bit more of a mixed feels mechanic, though I think for the majority of games it'll work well enough, but might just lead to some bad feelings for super close games where this actually winds up being the deciding factor and flipping a win to a loss. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it though. What do you make of the teased mechanics? In any case though, I'll leave that one there for now. Feel free to check out the video sponsor in Crusader Games, link down in the video description. A big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. Feel free to check out them or the other affiliate discount retailers around the world when the pre-orders go live on Friday night to Saturday morning. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see reviews of the Space Wolf Codex and the mission deck when we get the details for them. I look forward to talking through them in full. And if you want to support the channel more directly, check out the Patreon page linked down in the video description. There's a few benefits for backers there, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways and things. In any case though, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.